move to the second industry, which is crypto exchanges. Now, crypto exchanges are one of those, it's the highest performing investment on Bank to the Future. We've had several of them on Bank to the Future. We've had Coinbase, we've had Bitfinex, we've had Bitstamp, we've had Kraken, we've had Shapeshift, we had Circle that used to own Poloniex, but then ended up selling that asset. And we've had others that are not coming to mind right now. Now BnkToTheFuture.com is in the exchange business as well. So exchanges have been the highest performing investments on Bank to the Future. Those that invested from the Series A to the Series B in Kraken ended up with a 200x return. So exchanges are very unique in that they do well in both downtime. They don't do so well during flat markets, but when the market's pumping or dumping, they do well because people are getting in for either shorting and lots of different products have been built, or they're looking to buy and sell. So in times of volatility, exchanges do well. In times of flat markets, they tend to do less well. So what we saw, so we've been speaking with some of our exchange clients, and what we saw from Kraken is a 98% increase in USD deposits to the exchange. So that means that they've had more deposits of US dollars to Kraken than other times. Normally, there might be people using Tether, or they might be sending Bitcoin in order to sell Bitcoin or exchange Bitcoin or trade for different currencies. But this is US dollars entering the exchange. That means that people are taking their fiat money and they're most likely exchanging it for Bitcoin at these prices. So that's a real interesting indicator. And also, we're seeing that the exchange's volume is increasing during these turbulent times. So the interesting part about this as well is on our secondary market on Bank to the Future, due to unfortunate reasons, as people are adjusting to what their current situation is, some of our investors might have had some of a big chunk of their wealth wiped out during this financial crisis on paper. Which means that some may no longer be accredited investors, or they, it's because they may not have the $1 million in their assets in paper value anymore. And so we get these changing scenarios. And some of the investors are looking for liquidity, quite frankly, simply because, their situation might have changed. So on the secondary market, some people, we haven't introduced our price floor for that we will be introducing in future releases. So some people will be looking to sell their assets like Kraken shares, discounted to the valuations that people originally invested in. So it creates an opportunity for those that are in a position to try and build a portfolio. I think the old Warren Buffett phrase is sell when, I'm going to make sure I get this right. I'm buying when people are fearful and selling when people are excited. What's the phrase? I forgot. Do you know it, Adam?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I can't remember the quote.
I'm buying when people are fearful and selling. No, butchered it. You know what I mean? He's trying to do the contrarian, the opposite of what everyone else is doing. So those, and really that requires financial resources. So not everybody can execute that. We're all in different situations. I'm trying to be somewhat, empathic to everyone going through different situations right now. But for those that are liquid, they have the opportunity to snap up some of those Kraken shares at a discounted valuation through our SPV at a time when they're doing, really becoming more and more important to the infrastructure. So personally, I see crypto exchanges still as a big winner that can come from these times, because it's volatility that drives their business model. And I think we're not going to see, as far as I can tell, some of the larger, more established exchanges, they seem to be strengthening their positions. We see that with Binance making a $400 million acquisition of CoinMarketCap. And we're seeing that with these different indicators. So, Adam, you got any thoughts on crypto exchanges, how they might be affected by this health crisis? Obviously, things like good policies on disaster recovery. We saw things earlier this year or last year with Quadrica, where mismanaged exchanges led to, when people passed away, they lost client funds. These are obviously very important subjects during these turbulent times.
Yeah, and I mean, it is true that, volatility is what makes exchanges thrive. And it's one of those businesses where you don't have to have a physical office. Everyone can work remotely. So at least in principle, you're not likely to have a negative effect on those businesses in the same way as, say, a factory would. But there are, as you mentioned, certain risks that every business experience, and that's the key person risk. It's having one or two, maybe even a few people that, if they were not around, then the business would not be able to continue. And that's one of the reasons why financial services businesses are regulated. They're regulated because, as a result of being regulated, they are required to have certain procedures in place to address the key person risk. So, for example, Diacle, a regulated brokerage, it itself has to address this problem of key person risk. A few directors that have too much control, and if they were not there anymore, how would you continue the business? And the issue with cryptocurrency, obviously, is that if you have too many people that have control over assets, digital assets, then that is a problem in itself, because that attracts potential internal fraud within that business. So the natural kind of trajectory for cryptocurrency exchanges have a few people that have control, and then that creates this problem of key person risk, as we saw with, as you mentioned, with the Quadrica exchange, even going back as far as Mt. Gox. That was literally one person that had ultimate control. So it's a bit of a dilemma to how do you manage risk when you have digital assets? If there are too many people involved with it, that itself produces risks. But if only a few people are involved in managing those assets, then that can pose a fundamental risk if something happens to that person. But that comes down to regulation and good governance, and being able to manage the risks of that business. And oftentimes, I always look at businesses that have gone through tough times before. If I look at the likes of Bitfinex, Bitfinex have gone through very tough times, probably more so than any other exchange. So that to me is an indicator of how resilient that business is, that it can go through very almost a headwind to the business that could seek to annihilate the business, but yet can survive it. And borrowing the phrase of Nietzsche, whatever you survive makes you stronger. So, and I think that's the truth with these cryptocurrency exchanges. Because not all of them are regulated, in other words, that they are required to have provisions to address key persons missing. If they're not regulated, then what you're looking for is how resilient they have proven themselves to be, as another indicator.
Really interesting as well. Bitfinex is one of the SPVs on our secondary market, and the one that's got the highest volume in terms of, the market's still in beta, so it's a fairly illiquid market, but that's the one that's got the highest volume behind Kraken. And speaking of exchanges, before we move to the next industry, there's also the fringe exchanges in different areas of the world. Of course, I was talking about some of the major exchanges, but then we've also got companies that will be coming onto our secondary market potentially in the future, like Bitso, the largest exchange in Mexico, was one of our portfolio companies. We've also had, speaking of ingenuity and seeing through no matter what, a really interesting scenario with Uno Coin. I thought the writing was on the wall with Uno Coin. It's one of the major exchanges in India. Obviously, with regulatory changes in India and the central bank in India kind of trying to make it illegal for banks to engage with crypto exchanges, leading to them having to lay off all their staff. Some of our other portfolio companies didn't survive that. But Unocoin actually, had to take all of their staff out. But the founder just stuck at it and reduced the cash burn down to virtually nothing. And still just was determined, lobbying the regulator, engaging in furthering the community in India, and eventually ending up with a big win where the ban on Bitcoin by banks in India was actually lifted. The central bank is actually looking to appeal that right now, but it's a really inspiring story. And if they come through this at the other end, then it's an example of that tenacity, that ability. When you're looking at companies, you're really thinking, you're sussing out, are these people, are these entrepreneurs, are these founders, are they in it for the right reasons, and are they going to stick with it through thick and thin? Bitfinex has certainly been one of those companies that so many reasons for them to give up, yet they figured out a way, and it's really been quite spectacular to watch.